Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Reddit, what is your most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story? Serious, Episode-6. It all started in September 2006 when I get really ill with a high fever. I'm delirious, should have gone to the hospital but decided I could tough it out. My girlfriend at the time was doing her best, switching out DVDs, changing sheets when I sweat through the current ones, etc. Well, 2 days later my fever breaks and my GF asked me who Donald Crisp was because I kept saying his name. I replied that he was an actor from the 30s, but I couldn't name any of his films except some Lassie ones. She goes on to tell me that I was calling out to Mr. Crisp that he had to save her, and when she asked me in my fever state who he had to save, I replied, Butto is coming back home to die. Fast forward to 2007 where I have a nightmare seeing Indira Gandhi get killed and this guy runs over to me and says, it will happen to her too. Sind is no place for learned people. Donald Crisp again. So, the dream plays out and I see this woman wearing a blue dress and headscarf get shot, then there is fire everywhere, people scream. Dream magic happens and Donald Crisp and I are in a lounge, and he hands me a newspaper that reads, Butto killed in Sikh states, but the paper looks old, there is no date, and the price is 5 cents. I wake up, think nothing of it except it was a random-ass dream. 3 days later she gets killed. That's not the weirdest part. Maybe a week later I'm watching TCM, and a film named Jezebel comes on and who is in it but Donald Crisp. My friend and I decided to take a trip from our Midwest state to Florida to celebrate our college graduation. We stayed in Atlanta on the first night of the trip. We were outside of a diving bar, the Highlander, and this friendly guy and his girlfriend started making small talk with us. Simple questions like, where are you from, and where did you graduate from college, and so forth. We found out they were from Rockford, Illinois and had just graduated as well. We all left together as they wanted to go back to their hotel, and we wanted to get to another bar. They left it in his black 05 BMW Z4 convertible with a Chicago Bears decal on the back. Anyway, the next morning we, hungover as hell, decided to hit Route 75 to finish our trip down. We hit horrible traffic. Bumper to bumper for well over an hour just about 50 miles south of Atlanta. We get to the source of the traffic and it's people rubbernecking a one-car accident. 2 blue tarps over corpses and a wrecked black 05 BMW Z4, with its top open, on its side right next to them. The Chicago Bears decal confirmed what we already knew. Man. Her severed arm was right next to one of the tarps. Uncovered. It unsettles me. I don't even remember their names, or if they even told us, yet I think about them a lot because they were my age. What would they be doing? They wanted to marry but weren't engaged yet. Would they have kids now? Ugh. One day, I found out my uncle was in the hospital because his heart problems caught up to him. So, my family and I called the hospital, and we talked to him. He always could make any situation a bright situation, he had the best sense of humor. He was making jokes, and I was trying to laugh as I was crying and trying to put words out through the tears. We had to hang up before I could say bye, or I love you or anything. The next day we got a call saying how he died, and that he wanted us to know first. The next morning, I just woke up, my eyes flew open. I don't know why, I just did. Then I saw an orb banging against the walls and flying around. I had a feeling it was him, so I asked, Are you my uncle? Dennis, it responds while floating over the picture I have of him on my wall. Then I heard a whisper in my ear, in his voice, because it wanted to, it has its rights. That was the ending to our favorite joke that could make me smile any time. It's not so creepy, but it felt good knowing that he was okay. Miss you, Dennis, smiley face. When I was a kid, I was trying to get to sleep at my grandma's house, tossing and turning. I rolled over one time and there was a kid standing next to my bed, seemed to kind of be glowing. He was wearing like really old clothes and holding a big birthday present and a party hat. Rolled over, shut my eyes tight, and forced myself to sleep. Few years later I'm lying in bed, first night sleeping in our new house, look up and see a bright-ass light in the corner of my room. Soon as I look it kind of swoops down over me and out my door, sup loud buzzing as it goes that left my ears ringing for a while after. Aside from those just random weird things like, when you have a TV on behind you and someone walks by and blocks the sound? That, but when nobody else is in my room. Almost forgot. Years after I saw the boy in that room, my uncle had moved into that room, something like 10 years later or better. IRC. Wakes up to the feeling of someone sitting down on the end of his bed, looks, nothing there. A few minutes later he feels whatever it was get off the bed. My fiancé traveled all around the states for work, and we were living in Texas. We got the call for another job in PA, so before going out there we decided to visit our families in CA. Now for some reason I had a horrible feeling, and we got in a fight about going home. Our families' homes were about 6 hours apart in CA, so we stopped at his parents' house for a night, and I took off to my parents' house with our son the next morning. I bawled my eyes out the morning I left. I couldn't understand why I was so upset because I'm not a super emotional person. He held me and told me, "It's not like I'm going away. I'll see you in less than a week." I drive home and I'm there for 2 days or so. I talked to him on the phone late one evening and he sounds really tired. I got off the phone and quickly fell asleep. I find myself having an overwhelming feeling of cold. Like I'm all alone and sorrow and blackness are enveloping me. It was the scariest feeling I've ever experienced. The next day I tried in vain to reach my fiancé by phone. I got the most heartbreaking phone call ever about 6 p.m. He was gone. Passed away in his sleep from heart disease-related problems. I felt him leave me. I know this now. It was creepy and scary, and I can never shake the feeling. I miss him every day. I was probably in the 7th grade and was staying at my best friend's house. He lived in a rural area, right outside of a small town. We decided that tonight would be a cool night to go out and rap some houses and asked his parents if it was cool for us to go out that night. His dad told us no, he wanted us to stay in and that we were not allowed to leave. Well, my friend doesn't like to take no for an answer, so we snuck out at about 1 a.m. His house sits on top of a hill, with a long gravel driveway that connects to the road. We made it down, with a giant black trash bag of toilet paper, and just as soon as we hit the pavement, my friend said he heard a car coming and we should get off the road. So, we jumped down into the ditch along the side of the road and lay flat in the grass, and sure enough a little while later a car speeds by. We give it a few seconds and then jump up to head on our way. That's when my friend goes, "Shit man, it's coming back." I didn't know what he meant until I looked up and way down the road you could see brake lights, and the car turning around in the middle of the road. We dive down flat again, wondering what is going on. We're both in dark clothes, and it's pitch black out. It's not like we stuck out like sore thumbs. The car comes by again, slowly, but it's on the opposite side of the road this time. It drives past and we wait. My friend puts his hand on me to keep me down and looks up out of the ditch. "Dude. It's coming again." By this time, we're both nervous. It's obviously not a police car, dark colored with no markings of any kind, and what if it's not just some concerned citizen? There's a culvert in the ditch close by, and I start to army crawl towards it. My friend tells me to be still, the car slowly rolls by, and stops. Right over the top of us. It drives off. It circles back. It drives by slowly. It stops. It drives off. I think it happened twice more. After the last time, we saw it go a little way down the road and we jumped up, ditched the toilet paper, and sprinted up to his house. We locked the doors, set the alarms, and watched. I remember when I looked out the window and saw the car, idling out by the end of his driveway. That was terrifying. We spent the rest of the night sitting in his living room with plastic bats and hockey sticks to defend ourselves. I get that it could have been literally anything besides a child molester, but tell that to 7th grade me. I'm sure this is supposed to be more like ghost stuff, but I'm going to tell you about the most scared I've ever been in my life. Last year a friend of mine passed away, we'll call him Charlie. I'm in the army and he had taken some frag to the leg in Iraq, but he pulled through, so it came out of nowhere. His death was a bit of a personal matter, but all you need to know is that my other friend, who I'll call Bill, took it extremely hard. This guy Bill has been my best friend in the military. He's that guy who everyone wants to hang around, a perfect blend of friendliness and confidence. He knows what is important, what isn't, and most of all he genuinely cares for people. Everyone who reads this will know the type of person I'm talking about. Anyhow, he's the best friend I've ever had, bar none. So, a week or so later, Charlie's family fly out to the nearby town, and we all decide to have a bit of a memorial. I'm not yet 21 at this point, so I get to play the DD. My friend Bill is hitting the bottle hard, doing shots with everyone, downing pitchers left and right. As the night goes on he seems to get increasingly serious until about 1 a.m. Bill walks up to me and says, "Hey, come outside with me while I smoke." We both go out. He sits on a concrete block out in the parking lot and stares at the ground for a while. Then he says the scariest thing I've ever heard someone say. "After I go home tonight, I'm going to kill myself." Naturally, I start to freak out and start to try and talk him down. I end up in tears. He's telling me how he hates himself. I hit him in the face. He starts to break down a bit. Stuff started to go a little crazy. My squad leader ended up walking up to us, and that is the only time I have ever told him to go away and leave me alone. I won't leave you with some cliffhanger. Long story short, a few other friends come over and talk to him. After he had a good talk and gotten some feelings out, I threw him in my car. Mind you, I'm still terrified at this point. We get back to the barracks. I walk him back up to his room and push him into the closet. I close the door and sleep against it the entire night. The next morning, he ends up asking me why he was sleeping in the closet. I told him the story, and that he was not drinking for an exceptionally long time. So, kiddies, that's my story about fear. It's not your life you end up fearing for the most, it's the lives of those you love. When I was 17 to 18 we lived in a little village called Shipton Bellinger in Hampshire, England. There are two towns fairly close that almost form an oval. I've always had trouble sleeping and was getting really into fitness then, so I started going out fairly regularly at 12/1 am and running, taking that oval route. It was a couple of miles run and tired me out nicely. So, one night I'm coming to the end of the circuit. I'd gone via Tidworth and back up towards Ludgershall. I know some of you are Google mapping this. There's a secondary school called Castle Down which is near a back road which leads towards my village again, unlit with trees on either side and then big open fields. So, I'm under a street lamp outside the school tightening my laces when there is a ton of noise from the woods. I figure it's just a deer or something. So, I finish tying up and start to jog down the road, the noise is getting louder and louder. It gets to the point where something is audibly coming towards me through the woods, and I hear the metal fence shake as something starts to climb it. I took off so fast down that road, like full-on sprinting the entire mile or so, constantly repeating to myself, if it can catch me it deserves me, and don't waste time looking, you know it's there, just run. Freaked me out. I got into the village, stopped, and had a look for about a minute to see if anything came out of the darkness. Then I pegged it to my row and house. Still don't know if it was a person or animal or what. And quite frankly, I'm glad I never got to find out. When I was 13, I lived in a small town in rural Zimbabwe. We had a large, single-story house with a massive garden that surrounded the property. On one side of the house, the garden narrowed between our house and the fence of the neighbor's house. At the end of this narrow section was an empty, decrepit cement-lined pond that I had recently cleared of rubble and plant life with the plan of eventually filling it again. One afternoon, my friend Dan and I were messing around in the garden, and for some reason I found myself running down the narrowed section of the garden straight towards the pond. Suddenly, and for some reason that I can't really articulate, dread and fear washed over my body like 1,000 needles raining from the sky. I stopped dead in my tracks about 2 meters from the pond, and found myself breathlessly staring at it, motionless. From the crack on one side of the pond, a long snake, perhaps a meter long, emerged 3 or 4 seconds later. It was a Mozambique spitting cobra, a large, aggressive, and extremely venomous snake that wouldn't hesitate to bite or spit at threats, like a 13-year-old boy running past its new home in the wall of the pond, for instance. I slowly backed away and the pond was refilled with sand the next day. To this day I don't know what it was that stopped me dead in my tracks, but if I continued perhaps I wouldn't be here today. It was 2002 and I was hitchhiking around the U.S. I was on my way to a rainbow gathering in the Mark Twain National Forest just outside of Ironton, Missouri. It was about 11 p.m. when we made it to the state road that led into the forest. It was too dark to see the discreet stacked stone cairns that led us to the seed camp location, so we decided to pull it over on the side of the road and wait till morning. All night, we heard what sounded like children playing. Lots of kids. Like an entire playground worth. Except we were miles from the nearest public road, out in the middle of BLM land, and the noises continued on throughout the entire night. Next morning we found the seed camp location and settled in. At the height of the gathering there were maybe 150 people there, but in the seed camp stage there were maybe a dozen or so of us who got there early to set up the site. A few of us went wandering around in the hills looking for firewood and perhaps a fresh spring to get water from. We came across an old foundation for a house out in the middle of the woods. The house that stood on it must have been gone for quite some time because there were decent-sized trees growing where it once stood. There were a few pieces of rotted boards scattered about, and some rusted nails and other metal bits that must have served some integral function for the home. We figured there might be some cool old junk lying around, so we looked closer. We found a kid's shoe, half rotted on the forest floor. Then we found another. And another. And another. And then we found half-decayed garbage bags full of them. Hundreds of kids' shoes, of all styles, from old-timey dress shoes to those jelly shoes from the 80s. Some looked relatively new, some looked like they'd been out there for decades. Scattered within a 25-foot radius of this old foundation. Oddly enough, there wasn't any other stuff out there. No old refrigerator, or maybe some junk appliance or tools or whatnot. Just kids' shoes. My friend knew a woman by some loose extension who had a really horrific experience but didn't know it till weeks later. I think she was a friend of his uncle's, who he was really close to. She was a hiker/camper, and general outdoors enthusiast. From what I can gather, she was a really independent woman, deeply knowledgeable about survival and wildlife, and would often go on camping retreats on her own, bringing only her supplies and a camera with her. Anyway, she decides to embark on her biggest hike or camping retreat or what have you, yet. I don't recall exactly where it was, but if I were to guess, I'd say it was the Andes Mountains. So, she goes on the camping trip for about 2 weeks, does everything she wants to do, and more or less has a great, fulfilling experience. She leaves the trip unharmed, with nothing out of the ordinary occurring to her knowledge. Sometime later, she gets the pictures she took of the trip developed, and upon going through them, she finds several pictures of herself, sleeping in her tent. It all started in September 2006 when I get really ill with a high fever. I'm delirious, should have gone to the hospital but decided I could tough it out. My girlfriend at the time was doing her best, switching out DVDs, changing sheets when I sweat through the current ones, etc. Well, 2 days later my fever breaks and my GF asked me who Donald Crisp was because I kept saying his name. I replied that he was an actor from the 30s, but I couldn't name any of his films except some Lassie ones. She goes on to tell me that I was calling out to Mr. Crisp that he had to save her, and when she asked me in my fever state who he had to save, I replied, Butto is coming back home to die. Fast forward to 2007 where I have a nightmare seeing Indira Gandhi get killed and this guy runs over to me and says, it will happen to her too. Sindh is no place for learned people. Donald Crisp again. So, the dream plays out and I see this woman wearing a blue dress and head scarf get shot, then there is fire everywhere, people scream. Dream magic happens and Donald Crisp and I are in a lounge, and he hands me a newspaper that reads, Butto killed in Sikh states, but the paper looks old, there is no date, and the price is 5 cents. I wake up, think nothing of it except it was a random-ass dream. 3 days later she gets killed. That's not the weirdest part. Maybe a week later I'm watching TCM, and a film named Jezebel comes on and who is in it but Donald Crisp. A friend of mine and I were driving home from high school one afternoon when we came to a red light at a main intersection. The left turn light turns green, and my friend accelerates, maybe a bit too quickly, his tires peeled out a little bit. Suddenly, the green pickup truck that was behind us speeds up next to us on our left and the driver is a scary-looking bald man that is clearly yelling at us, even though the window is rolled up. We unfortunately got to another red light, and I alert my friend as the truck driver pulls up right next to us again at the light, left side this time. The driver motions us to roll down our window and we try to decline as politely as possible. That's when he makes a gun with his hand and points it at us, and then points it at his head and pulls the trigger. He starts making moves toward his glove box and the light turns green. We both just look at each other with looks of terror and my friend guns it as we both scream. The truck peels out towards us and is tailing us, right on our ass. I decided the best thing to do is to try and lose him near my house in my neighborhood. I'm familiar with the area and if we get ahead of him enough we can pull into a cul-de-sac before he spots us. Sure enough, he is following us the whole time, and as we pull into my neighborhood, I tell my friend to speed up quickly and pull a left into a subdivision. It worked. We speed down until we find a busy-looking cul-de-sac and park behind a car on a driveway. We lay low and eventually saw the truck drive by, right by the street we chose to hide in. Huge sigh of relief. At that point we decided to just chill out and try to laugh about it. We don't know what could have happened. We ended up calling the police and meeting up with an officer to make sure we could get home safely. Never saw him again.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.